Chapter 5. The Face of Evil. There is no good and evil. There is only power, and those too weak to seek it. J.K. Rowling. Cooper's skin felt hot and stretched tight. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, and as he stumbled and fell over the tripwire, his last conscious thought was that he really hated the thought of dying like this, in some goddamn trap he should have had the sense to avoid. The tripwire malfunctioned, however, and instead of filling him full of agonizing holes and more shredded flesh from the homemade bomb the tripwire was supposed to detonate, he simply ripped open his festering wounds on the gravel path. His head bobbed back, covered in blood, mixed with greenish-yellow pus, the infection from Riley's bone shards, and the crash trailing down his cheek to mix with the blood. His vision faded to black, and he passed out cold. Not even the sharp kick of a booted foot in his ribs a few moments later revived him. A slightly built, pale-faced teenager kicked again, harder this time, and earned a small groan in response. "Well, you ain't dead, not yet at least." She raised a hand to her mouth and trilled a bird call. There was a distant shout in response. She shifted her rifle from her shoulder, sat down on a rock nearby, and watched the man on the ground. A few minutes went by. "What you whistle for, Delwyn?" A young man in his late teens, followed by 2 younger boys, came to an abrupt stop at the sight of an unconscious man within the AR's borders. "Oh shit, you bagged one." Delwyn eyed him and pointed to the tripwire. "You rigged it wrong. It should have gone off, but it didn't." The young man glared at her for a moment, before turning back to Cooper, still lying on the ground, unmoving. "He stinks," he grinned at Delwyn. "What, you want him for your boyfriend or something? Setting your sights awful low, aren't you?" Delwyn returned his needling with a withering look. "Oh, shut it, Haim. He's as good as dead. I gotta look at his face 'fore he face-planted. That blood isn't just from the gravel. He got messed up a while back, and it looks to have caught up with him." She stared at Cooper and thought for a minute. "Saul will want to talk to him, though. Look at his clothes. Those are Western Front colors." Haim chewed on this for a moment. "Think he's alone? You see anyone else round here?" One of the younger boys sniggered at the sarcasm in her voice. Haim reached out and smacked him on the side of the head, and the boy yelped and slunk out of range. "Right, let's bag him and tag him then." Delwyn and the other younger boy fastened Cooper's hands behind his back with zip tie, and then bound his ankles as well. After they were sure he wasn't going to jump up and make a grab for their weapons or their throats, Delwyn patted him down, removing a large knife along with a high-point 9mm. Haim barked in derision at the sight of the handgun. "What a piece of shit! Hell, he'd be better off shooting himself in the head with that damn thing." "I for knives." Cooper's voice was muffled and indistinct. His eyes had opened and the young boy jumped back, while Delwyn jerked in surprise. The instant she did, she felt a sting of embarrassment. This bloody mess at her feet couldn't hurt her. If Saul had seen, well, he was harder on her than the rest. It wasn't as easy as the other girls thought, having the commander of America Reborn for a father. "Christ, Kerwin, stop being such a pansy. He's tied up like some damn Christmas goose. He can't hurt you." She rolled Cooper over on his back. "Now say that again." "I said I for knives." Cooper's mouth wouldn't stretch the right way. He could feel the crusted goo and the grinding of the bones that obviously had not set right. Eating had been agony, and he hadn't had the need to talk to anyone in weeks. Obviously, he needed practice. "What the hell's he saying?" Haim asked. "He's saying he prefers knives." Delwyn half-smiled at Scott. A bit of a thrill twisted through her. "My kind of guy, exceptin' he's uglier than Camellia." Camellia was their resident slave, as many of the America Reborn members thought of her. She was Hispanic, one of the coloreds they had picked out of a small group holed up miles from here. The rest they had shot or let burn to death in the fire the AR had set to the buildings during the fighting. Camellia had a jagged scar that cut across her face and down one arm. She couldn't walk right either. She had survived the Amtrak train bombings, but not without losing her looks in the process. Before the collapse, she had been a nurse. Medical knowledge, even packaged in the wrong-colored skin, was a benefit the AR couldn't afford to discard, so they had tied her up and dragged her out of that house of death well over a year ago now, and kept her busy cleaning wounds and patching everyone up ever since. "Let's get him out of here and on back to Seoul," Delwyn said. "He's definitely going to be interested in this guy." Half an hour later, with Cooper fevered and close to collapse, the group of child soldiers had dragged him into the main AR camp. As soon as they had come into the clearing, within sight of a small assembly of cottages and low, dark buildings, a crowd of at least 20 adults had gathered immediately, all of them armed. Many sported tattoos that curled from under their heavy shirt sleeves and collars to wrap around necks and hands. Swastikas, skulls, and SS bolts adorned several of the men's shirts and coats as well. The colors of the Western Front started a flurry of angry muttering among the adults, and 2 burly men stepped forward to help drag Cooper to a building near the center of the clearing. It was much larger than the rest, and the area had obviously been a popular campground pre-collapse. The buildings were arranged in straight lines with neatly laid gravel paths winding between them, expanding as they approached what had most likely been a communal kitchen and social area. There were other buildings of newer construction scattered about, as well as several yurts and large tents. Through another stand of trees there were several fenced areas, one filled with horses, another held sheep, and Cooper could make out a cultivated field beyond that. This camp was obviously organized and well-established. A wonderful aroma of cooking food wafted out of the building and into the clearing. If Cooper had felt even half human and not consumed with fever and exhaustion, his stomach would have rumbled in response. As it was, he was having difficulty maintaining consciousness. A few moments later, Cooper's eyes focused blearily on a tall, bearded man. Solwyn Kingmaker had gray hair and piercing blue eyes. He looked to be in his late 50s and had the appearance of a kind father. At one time, Solwyn had had a different name, a rather mundane one at that, but that was before the collapse, before America Reborn had risen like a phoenix from the ashes of the broken fragments of the American Nazi Party. "A soldier, and from the Western Front, I see." Solwyn's eyes narrowed as he took in Cooper's appearance and turned to Delwyn. "Any sign of others?" "No, Pops. No, sir, no one." Delwyn stumbled over her words. Well, take him to Camellia and have her patch him up." He started to turn away and then turned back and added, "And tell that colored woman I don't want her wasting any of the remaining antibiotics on him. I've yet to see if he is of any use to us. Might be some cowardly deserter. Enemy or not, we don't need deserters." Cooper soon found himself in a dim room, hoisted onto a hard metal table, with a scarred Hispanic woman bending over him, examining his face wounds in great detail. "He's running a fever," she said out loud, mostly to herself. "I can tell that, Spick," Delwyn sneered. "Anything else?" Camellia didn't react to Delwyn's insult. She was focused on her patient. "Yes, his jaw is badly infected, and he needs it reset and wired shut so it can heal right. He will need a good dose of antibiotics." There was a pause as Delwyn turned and met Heim's eyes. She stared at him, never breaking the gaze as she said, "Sol said to get him patched up and give him whatever he needs." As Camellia opened a large metal cabinet and began selecting instruments and some of the last of the antibiotic packs, Delwyn closed the distance between her and Haim. "I know what Saul said, but I got a feeling about this guy." She said it in a whisper, brushing her lips against the older boy's ear. "You won't tell, will you?" She felt Haim shudder a bit in response, and he shook his head silently. Haim had been following her around like a puppy dog ever since she had started to fill out, and she used this obsession with her to full advantage whenever possible, teasing him and then pushing him away. Little Eric Brown, now known as Heimdall Stonekiller, was nothing better than a tool, but he was her tool, and she liked it that way. The chain around Camelia's ankle clanked as she moved back to Cooper, who had passed out by this point, and Delwyn couldn't help but snicker. If the stupid spick hadn't kept trying to escape, they would have left her unchained. Selwyn, Delwyn's father and leader of America Reborn, had explained to Delwyn that some of the coloreds were worth keeping alive, although it was never acceptable to breed with them. "Their blood is full of disease, the muddy bastards. Never ever allow a colored to touch you, Del." He had grasped her shoulder, bruising flesh, and continued, "The only reason we keep that colored spick around is for her stolen medical knowledge. We must keep looking for a better replacement so that we aren't exposed to her filthy diseases any longer than necessary." Selwyn had led the fight on the Spick compound over a year ago now. The Spicks had been overwhelmed by the AR's superior firepower and guerrilla fighting tactics. Saul had ordered everyone killed. No point in keeping around some screaming brown babies or helpless women. The Spick women weren't anything like the America Reborn women. They were soft, helpless, and useless for anything except spreading their legs and giving the white man diseases, Selwyn had explained to his group. But when they had set it all on fire, they found Camellia in one of the back rooms performing surgery on a mortally wounded boy. Selwyn had recognized her abilities immediately and stopped one of the men from blowing her head off. They had dragged her away, fighting and kicking, screaming until one of the men had cuffed her hard, sending her head flying back, cracking the glass of the side window in the lead truck and knocking her unconscious. When she had woken up, she had caught on pretty quick to keep her fool mouth shut, Delwyn mused. She had focused her efforts on trying to get away, until Saul had her chained and told her if she tried again, he'd cut through the tendons in her ankles, laming her permanently. Delwyn wasn't sure if it was the threat of never walking again, or the strength of the chain that had kept Camellia from trying again. But sure enough, she stayed put from then on. It would take nearly a week before Cooper was able to stand unassisted. Camellia had managed to repair the half-healed wreck that was his jaw, but there was no hope he would ever be good-looking again. A large dimpled scar ran along his right jawline, jagged, thick, white scar tissue buckling and twisting the skin. It would be another month until he could eat any solid food. As soon as he was fit to stand, however, Delwyn dragged him back into the headquarters. Her father was sitting at a large, ornate desk, reviewing an almost illegible report from the man in charge of the barnyard animals. It looked as though they would need to raid if they wanted enough sheep and goats for breeding stock and plenty of meat. He paused, frustrated by the man's illiterate scrawl, and removed his reading glasses. Scott stood before him in the same stinking clothes he had been in when they found him, but he stood straight and waited for Selwyn to address him. "Name?" he asked Scott. "Cooper. Scott Cooper." "So, deserter or spy?" he asked Cooper. "Independent agent, sir." Cooper managed to delay on the sir just a fraction longer than was respectful. "I see. And how does one become an independent agent?" "One does the best with what he's got, sir. The Western Front collapsed due to an improper mixing of color, sir. Cooper wasn't stupid. He had listened carefully and seen the tattoos. He figured it was the most expedient way to save his life, and possibly, just possibly, regain some of what he had lost in that raid. "And I'm to believe that you share our values?" Selwyn asked, raising an eyebrow in mock disbelief. "Believe what you like, sir. I'm in need of a bath," Cooper said calmly. "That spick medic you have, I wouldn't doubt that she has lice. More than likely scabies as well." Delwyn sniggered quietly behind him. Selwyn Kingmaker, formerly John Stump, a former television repairman from Southie, smiled. "A bath, then." He turned to Delwyn. "Have Kerwin take care of it and keep watch over him." He turned back to the reports and slid on his reading glasses, quite obviously dismissing him. "My knives, sir." Selwyn glanced at Cooper. "You have not proven yourself to me, Cooper. When you do, we will discuss it further." He turned away, again dismissing the young man in front of him. Cooper turned as if he were capitulating, and then moved stunningly fast, his arms and legs a blur as he ruthlessly attacked the large guard standing at attention behind him. Within seconds, the burly man was dead on the floor, and Scott Cooper stood there, the guard's knife in his right hand covered in gore. Cooper slowly set the weapon on the floor next to his victim. Delwyn had an AK-47 aimed at his belly, and the two other guards from outside the office were pointing their weapons at Cooper as well. He stood there, smiling. "Is that the proof you were looking for, sir?" He didn't move any closer to the leader. Didn't move at all, which was for the best. He had 3 people within a hair trigger of killing him. Despite this, he was as calm and cool as ice. Selwyn spared a glance at the piece of dead meat currently covering his office floor with a spreading pool of blood, and turned to Delwyn. "Make sure he gets his knives back." Then he turned back to Cooper. "Stay within the boundaries of the clearing, and out of the armory, or I'll have my men shoot you on sight." By the time he could eat solid food a few weeks later, Cooper had quietly carved out a comfortable niche for himself within the America Reborn group. He refused to change his name, however, which had been a tradition among the AR since the collapse. He quickly rose within the ranks, leading devastatingly brutal raids and bringing vast stores of food, ammunition, and other supplies, along with able-bodied men and women to swell the numbers of the neo-Nazi group. Scott Cooper had found a new home.